If you shout one more time, I will ask you to leave this diner." The whole place went dead silent. 14 customers froze where they sat. The porcelain cup Alessandro Romano had just hurled lay shattered against the wall, and the coffee was still running down in a slow brown ribbon toward the cracked tile floor, less than a hand's width from Emily's head. A few drops had landed on her sleeve. She didn't look at them. She looked at him. Alessandro Romano, 38 years old. The youngest boss in the history of the city, the man who had inherited an empire at 26 and made it twice as ruthless. His was the name people knew the way they knew which alleys to avoid after dark. The coat on his back cost more than Emily made in 4 months. 2 of his men stood guard at the door, and a third leaned against the jukebox with his arms folded. Victor Russo, the right hand, watching the room the way a wolf watches a field full of sheep. She was supposed to cry. She was supposed to apologize, to brew a fresh cup with trembling hands and pray for the man to leave. Instead, the waitress had said the one thing no one in this city had dared to say in 15 years, and the man the entire city feared stopped completely. Because for the first time in 15 years, someone was looking him straight in the eye without a single tremor. Before we go any further, if you love stories about courage, about dignity, and about the moment a quiet person finally refuses to bow down, subscribe to this channel and stay with me all the way to the end. And tell me in the comments which city you're listening from tonight. I want to see just how far this story travels. Now, let's go back a few seconds. The cup hadn't even finished its journey when the diner fell silent. Not the ordinary quiet of a slow night, but the kind of silence that feels like the whole world is holding its breath. The trucker by the window stopped chewing mid-bite. The old couple in the corner booth reached for each other's hands without realizing they were doing it. And Rosa, the cook, a woman who had walked through 2 wars and never once flinched at anything, set down her ladle and went very, very still. Emily Carter stood exactly where she had been standing, one hand still holding the half-empty coffee pot, the other resting on the edge of the counter. Behind her, the brown liquid kept sliding down the wall, dripping onto the cracked tile. The drops on her sleeve were cooling against her skin. She never glanced at them. 14 people watched her, and every single one of them was thinking the same thing. She doesn't know who she's talking to. She can't possibly know. But she knew. Everyone in this city knew. Emily set the coffee pot down on the warmer. She did it slowly, deliberately, and the small click of glass against metal was the only sound in the entire room. It rang out like a gunshot in a church. Alessandro Romano took 1 step toward the counter. The floorboard creaked under his weight. Somewhere in the back, the cooler hummed on, indifferent. Then he lowered his voice, and somehow, that was worse than the shouting. Far worse. A shout is fire. A whisper from a man like him is the cold blade that comes after. "Do you know who I am?" "I know exactly who you are," Emily said. She said it slowly, calmly, the way you might tell someone the time of day. "Then you know what happens to people who waste my time." Near the kitchen pass, Dana, the young waitress with 3 months on the job and a habit of apologizing for things that weren't her fault, made a small sound, almost a whimper, and took a step forward, as if to throw herself between them, as if to say sorry on Emily's behalf. Emily lifted 1 hand, just slightly. Dana stopped. And this was the moment. Everyone in that diner understood it. This was the moment when Emily Carter was supposed to lower her eyes, brew a fresh cup of coffee with shaking hands, and pray for the man to leave. That was how it always went. That was how it was supposed to go. But Emily Carter did not lower her eyes. She placed both hands flat on the counter, leaned forward, and looked Alessandro Romano directly in the face. "And I know what happens to customers who break things in this diner," she said, her voice almost gentle. "That cup costs $3. Now do you want another coffee? Or do you want your check?" Victor Russo, the man by the jukebox, let out a short, dry bark of a laugh, the laugh of a man who could not believe what he was hearing. One of the bodyguards at the door took a step forward, his hand sliding inside his jacket. "Nobody touches anything." Alessandro's voice cut through the room. His eyes never left Emily's face. Not for a heartbeat, because here was the thing that nobody else in that room understood but that Alessandro understood instantly. She was not afraid. He had spent 15 years learning to read fear in other people. He could smell it. He could see it in the way a man's throat moved when he swallowed, in the tiny tremor at the corner of a mouth, in the eyes that kept flicking toward the exits. He had built an entire empire on the reliable, predictable presence of fear in every room he walked into. Fear was his currency, his weather, his gravity, and it was not in this room. It was not in this woman. For a long moment, the two of them simply looked at each other across the counter. The coffee had stopped dripping down the wall. The old couple in the corner had not let go of each other's hands. Rosa had not moved from her place by the grill. Then, slowly, Alessandro Romano reached into his coat. Dana flinched, but what he drew out was a leather billfold. He removed $100 bill, laid it flat on the counter, and smoothed it once with 2 fingers. "For the cup," he said. Then he turned and walked out, his men scrambling to follow. The bell above the door rang once, twice, and he was gone into the night, the convoy of black cars pulling away from the curb, and the whole diner exhaled at once like a single living thing. Dana reached her first. "Are you out of your mind? Do you know who that was? Do you know what he could? I know who it was," Emily said. She picked up a rag, turned to the wall, and began wiping away the coffee. Her hands were perfectly steady. Rosa came out from behind the grill, wiping her hands on her apron, and stood looking at her with an expression that had no name. "Emily," she said quietly, "that man owns half this city. He owns judges. He owns cops. People who talk to him the way you just did don't always come back to work the next day." "Then I guess I'll have an interesting week," Emily said, but her voice cracked, just slightly, on the last word, and Rosa heard it. That was the thing nobody saw. Everybody saw the woman who had stared down Alessandro Romano without blinking. Nobody saw the woman who, 40 minutes later, sat in the cab of her 15-year-old car in the middle of an empty parking lot, her forehead pressed against the steering wheel, shaking so hard she couldn't get the key into the ignition. Nobody heard her whisper, over and over, into the dark, "What did I just do? What did I just do?" Because Emily Carter was not brave, not the way people would tell the story later. She was tired. There is a difference between courage and the moment you simply have nothing left to lose, and she knew exactly which one she had been running on. She made $10 an hour. She had spent the last 2 years watching her mother's body fail in small, cruel increments. She had spent 14 months arguing with insurance companies, cheerful voices that answered the phone and then explained, again and again, that the treatment her mother needed was not covered under her current plan. There was a drawer in her kitchen, stuffed with bills that she could no longer bring herself to open. Her savings account held $340, and for longer than she could remember, she had not slept more than 4 hours in a single night. Somewhere in the last few weeks, something inside her had quietly, completely run out. She finally got the car started and drove home. Her mother was awake when she came in, propped up against the pillows on the rented hospital bed that stood in the middle of their small living room, the little lamp on the side table casting a warm yellow glow over the thin face that Emily loved more than anything in this world. "You're late, baby." Her name was Margaret, and her voice these days was a paper-thin version of the strong, laughing voice Emily remembered from childhood. "Long night, Mama." Emily sat on the edge of the bed and took her mother's hand, careful of the IV line. "How are you feeling?" Like a woman who's going to outlive every doctor who ever underestimated her. Margaret smiled. Then her eyes narrowed, the way they had when Emily was 9 years old and hiding a bad report card. "Something happened. Don't lie to me. I made you." Emily looked down at their joined hands. "Mama," she said, "I might have done something stupid tonight." "You?" Margaret raised an eyebrow. "Never. There was a man at the diner. A bad man. The kind of bad they write about in newspapers." Emily hesitated. "He shouted at me. He threw a cup at the wall. And I shouted back. Worse than back." Margaret was quiet for a long moment. Then she reached up with a trembling hand and touched her daughter's cheek. "Good," she said softly. "I raised you to stand up straight. Whatever happens now, you remember that you stood up straight." And Emily, who had not allowed herself to cry in front of her mother in 2 years, because she could not allow it, because one of them had to stay unbroken, felt the tears come anyway, hot and silent. She pressed her mother's hand against her face and let them fall. She did not sleep that night. She lay on the couch a few feet from her mother's bed, listening to the soft mechanical rhythm of the oxygen machine, and she waited. She waited for headlights sweeping across the parking lot. She waited for a knock at the door. She waited for the sound of men with no faces coming to make an example of the waitress who didn't know her place. Nothing came. The morning came instead, gray and ordinary. She got up, made coffee, helped her mother to the bathroom, gave her the morning medications, and went to work the lunch shift with dark circles under her eyes and her chin held a little higher than it needed to be, daring the world to say something. She didn't know it yet, but the world was about to answer. The story had already gotten around by the time she tied on her apron. The diner was busy that day, and people looked at her differently, some with awe, some with the careful distance you keep from a person standing too close to the edge of a cliff. A regular named Pete, a retired mechanic who came in every day for the meatloaf and never once changed his order, caught her sleeve as she refilled his coffee. "I heard what you did," he said in a low voice. "That took guts, kid. But you watch yourself. That man doesn't forget." "I'm not worried about him forgetting," Emily said. "I'm worried about the rent." Pete laughed, but it was a worried laugh. The lunch rush came and went. Nothing happened. The second day passed. Nothing happened. And on the third day, at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, the dead hour, when the light through the windows had gone gold, and the diner was nearly empty, the bell above the door rang. Emily looked up. Alessandro Romano walked in. Alone. No convoy. No bodyguards. No coat worth a small fortune. Just a dark sweater, plain slacks, and a man who somehow looked smaller without an audience to be feared by. He stood in the doorway for a moment, and the few people left in the diner went quiet, and Dana behind the register went white as the napkins she was folding. He didn't take a table. He walked straight to the counter and sat down on the stool directly across from where Emily was standing, and folded his hands in front of him like a schoolboy. "I'd like a coffee," he said, "made however you want to make it. I won't complain." Emily looked at him for a long moment. Then she turned, took a clean cup, filled it, and set it down in front of him without a word. He wrapped both hands around it like it was the only warm thing he had touched in years. He didn't drink. He just looked down into the dark surface. "I didn't sleep that night," he said. "Funny," Emily said. "Neither did I. I kept waiting for your friends to come visit. They're not coming." He looked up. "I came to tell you that myself. Nobody is coming. Not that night, not tonight, not next week. You can stop waiting." Emily said nothing. She didn't trust it. You didn't survive in her world by trusting men like him. "You want to know why I came back?" he asked. "Not really." Something flickered across his face. Almost a smile. 15 years, he said. Maybe more. 15 years since anyone in this city looked at me the way you did that night. You know how people look at me? They look at my hands. They look at the door. They look anywhere but my eyes because they're afraid that if they meet my eyes, I'll see something I don't like. He turned the cup slowly on the counter. "You looked right at me. You told me you'd throw me out of your diner. A woman who pours coffee for $10 an hour." He shook his head. "And I believed you. That's the part I can't figure out." He lifted the coffee at last, drank, set it down. "What's your name?" "You don't get my name." "Why not?" "Because names are for people who've earned them," Emily said. "You broke a cup and threw $100 at me like I was a problem you could pay to go away. That's not a man I give my name to." Alessandro nodded slowly as if she had said something profound, as if he was filing it away somewhere deep. He finished the coffee. He stood up. He reached for his billfold and Emily's jaw tightened. He saw it, and he stopped. He put the billfold away. Instead, he reached into his pocket, pulled out a few crumpled singles and some change, counted out the exact price of 1 cup of coffee, and laid it neatly on the counter. "For the coffee," he said. "Just the coffee." And then he walked out, and the bell rang, and he was gone. He came back on Thursday, then again the following Tuesday, then Friday, 2, sometimes 3 times a week, always in the dead hours of the afternoon, when the light through the windows went gold and the diner belonged to no one. He stopped sitting at the counter and moved to the corner booth by the window, as if it had quietly become his. And he ordered real food now, meatloaf, pot roast, whatever the special of the day was. Plain American cooking that a man who could buy every restaurant in the world had no business eating. And he ate it like it was the best food he'd ever had. Somewhere around the second week, he pointed at the seat across from him. "Sit. 5 minutes. I'm a paying customer, I get 5 minutes." Emily glanced at Dana, who waved her on with an expression of barely contained panic, and she sat. Because she was curious, because she was tired, and because the man had ordered meatloaf, and that small, ordinary fact had disarmed her more effectively than any threat ever could have. That became the rule. 5 minutes. Sometimes 10. They were not friends. They were 2 people from opposite ends of the earth who had somehow found, in each other, the only person willing to tell them the truth. And she learned things. She learned that he had been orphaned at 12, his father killed in a settling of accounts, his mother dead 2 years later from working herself into the ground. She learned that the old boss had picked him up off the street and raised him the way you forge a blade, heated, hammered, and never once held, that he had inherited the empire at 26, that he had built everything he owned out of one single terror, the terror of ever being weak again, of ever being abandoned again. And somewhere along the way, Emily said one afternoon, wiping down the table beside his plate, "The thing you built to protect yourself became the thing that ate your life." He looked up at her sharply. She didn't apologize. She never apologized. That was the whole arrangement, even if neither of them had ever said it out loud. "You want to know what I think this is?" she went on. "You're lonely. That's all this is. You're the most powerful man in this city. And you're so lonely you drive across town to eat meatloaf in a roadside diner because a waitress shouted back at you once and didn't say sorry. You don't want to own me. You don't even want anything from me. You just want one person on this earth to talk to you like you're a man, instead of a name." For a moment, the booth was very quiet. Then Alessandro Romano laughed, a rough, broken, real laugh, like a muscle that hadn't been used in years. "That's the first true thing anyone has said to me in 15 years, he said. He turned his cup slowly on the table, looking out the window at the parking lot, at the ordinary cars and the ordinary people. And when he spoke again, his voice was so low she almost missed it. "Sometimes I wonder what it feels like," he said, "walking into a room where nobody's afraid of you. Just a room with people in it. I've never had that, not once. I wonder about it the way other men wonder about being rich." Emily didn't answer. "Some truths don't need company." She stood, picked up his empty plate, and went back to work, and she didn't see what was waiting across the street. A black car, parked in the long shadow of the hardware store, and behind the wheel, Victor Russo watching through the diner's window as his boss laughed, ate meatloaf, and talked with a waitress like an ordinary man. Watching, and not moving, for a very long time. His face darkened with something that had no name yet, because in their world, when a man like Alessandro Romano changed, it made people nervous, and nervous people act. The worst night in months came without warning. It was a little past 2 in the morning when the sound changed, the soft mechanical rhythm Emily had learned to sleep beside suddenly stuttering, and beneath it, her mother's breathing turning into a fight. Emily was off the couch before she was fully awake. She spent the rest of that night on her knees beside the hospital bed, holding her mother's hand, careful, always careful, of the IV line, listening to each breath claw its way in and claw its way out, certain that this was it. The 3 a.m. call had finally come, and she was living inside of it. Margaret pulled through by dawn. But the doctor, when Emily finally got him on the phone, was gentle in the way doctors are gentle when they're telling you to prepare yourself. "Without surgery and intensive treatment," he said, "we're talking weeks, maybe a month or 2. I'm so sorry, Emily. I wish I had better news." "Weeks?" She asked the question she already knew the answer to. $85,000 for the surgery and the first round of treatment alone. The best case number, the starting number. She had $340, and a car worth $800 if she was lucky and the buyer didn't look too closely at the transmission. That afternoon she sat at the kitchen table with the drawer full of bills finally open in front of her. Envelopes spread out like a losing hand of cards, and she did the math she had done 100 times before, and it came out the way it always came out. There was no version of the numbers where she won. There never had been. She had just never let herself see it all laid out at once. She put her head down on the table among the envelopes and stayed there a long time. In the other room, the oxygen machine hummed its steady rhythm, the proof that her mother was still breathing, still here, still hers. For now. She went to work the next day because rent doesn't grieve. She didn't plan to tell him. She had decided that on the drive over this was hers to carry, and she had been carrying things alone her whole life. But when she brought the coffee to the corner booth, Alessandro took one look at her face and set the cup down without drinking. "What happened?" "Nothing. You're wearing the exact face I had the morning my mother died." His voice was quiet. "Don't tell me nothing." He pushed the seat across from him out with his foot. "Sit down." And it came out before she could stop it because she was so tired, and because he was looking at her with the eyes that, despite everything, despite all their history, were the only eyes in her life that had ever asked her how she was doing. She had a crisis 2 nights ago. The worst one yet. Emily's voice was flat, scraped clean of everything. "The doctor says weeks. Without $85,000, my mother has weeks." The diner was quiet around them. It was the dead hour. Dana was in the back, and the gold light lay across the table between them, and the most feared man in the city sat there with a waitress's grief in his hands, and no idea what a man was supposed to do with it. Alessandro didn't move for a very long time. He didn't say he was sorry. She was grateful for that everybody said they were sorry, and it never meant anything. It was just a noise people made to close a door. Instead, he stood up. He reached into his pocket, counted out the exact change for a coffee he hadn't touched, and laid it neatly on the table. And then he walked out of the diner without a single word. Emily watched his shape cross the parking lot through the window, and she didn't know what she had just witnessed. A man running away from someone else's pain. or a man who had just decided to do something. With Alessandro Romano, she was about to learn. The two things looked exactly the same. The man with the paperwork came the next morning. He was young, in a gray suit that fit him a little too well, carrying a leather folder and an expression of professional blankness. He asked for Emily by name. He didn't introduce himself. He simply laid the documents on the counter and walked her through them in a low, efficient voice. Her mother's treatment had been paid for. All of it. The best cardiac specialist in the state had been retained. A medical transport would come Thursday to move Margaret to a real facility, with real equipment, real doctors, real hope. "Sign here," the man said. "And here." Emily's hand hovered over the pen. It didn't move. The man closed the folder, and for a moment, something almost like curiosity crossed his blank face. "You should know," he said quietly, "that I've worked for Mr. Romano for 8 years. And I have never once seen him do anything like this. Pay for a stranger's mother. No conditions, no file opened on you, nothing." He picked up the folder and tucked it under his arm. "Whatever you did to him, miss, be careful. The people around him have noticed that he's changed. And in our world, when a man like that changes, it makes people nervous." He nodded once. "Nervous people act." He walked out, and Emily stood at the counter with a cold feeling spreading slowly through her chest. By noon, she was standing in front of a building of gray stone on the other side of the city, the kind of building that had no sign because it didn't need one. The hallways inside were silent. Men in dark suits watched her pass without a word, and not one of them stopped her, which somehow made it worse. She pushed through the door of the office at the end of the top floor and slapped the folder down on the desk in front of Alessandro Romano. "Take it back." He looked up from his papers. "You didn't even. I don't need to hear the rest. The answer is no." She was breathing hard. "Nothing is free with men like you. You fix my mother, and then one day, next month, next year, you come back, and you need something. A favor, a blind eye, a package held behind the counter. And I can't say no, because you own my mother's life now. That's how it works with your kind. You don't give gifts, you give leashes." The words hung in the air of that quiet office. And when Alessandro answered, his voice for the first time since she'd known him had no power in it. No weight, no threat, just a man. "My whole life, everything has been leverage," he said. "Every person, a transaction. Everyone owes me, or I owe them. There is not one thing I have ever done that didn't have a price tag hidden somewhere on it." He stood up slowly, both hands flat on the desk. "Let me do one decent thing. One. Do you have any idea how long it's been since I did something just because it was decent? Let it be the one clean thing I ever did in a whole dirty life. And I swear to you, on the only thing I have left that's worth swearing on, I will never, not once, not ever, ask you for anything in return." Emily stared at him, and her jaw was set, and her hands were shaking. Then he said the thing that broke her. "Don't let your mother die so you can be proud of yourself. She raised you better than that. You told me she taught you to stand up straight." He came around the desk and stopped an arm's length away close, but not touching, the way he never touched. Standing up straight doesn't mean refusing every hand. Sometimes it means knowing the difference between a hand and a chain. And Emily Carter, who had not truly cried in 2 years, not the real kind, not the kind that empties you, put her face in her hands and wept in the office of the most dangerous man in the city. He didn't touch her. He didn't say there. He just waited, the way she had once waited for him to find his words. "Okay," she finally said, muffled, broken. "Okay, for her, not for me. For her," he agreed quietly. And then, for the first time, he said her name. Emily. He had known it for weeks, Dana, probably, and he had held it, kept it, waited until the one moment when it would mean something. The medical transport came on Thursday, just as promised, and then the impossible began to happen quietly, steadily, one day at a time. Within 2 weeks, Margaret could sit up without fighting for air. By the 3rd week, she was complaining about the hospital food, which Emily had learned, over 2 long years, was the surest sign in the world that her mother's spirit was coming back. She demanded the good crossword puzzles, the hard ones. She told a nurse that the pudding was an insult to puddings everywhere. Emily caught herself laughing one afternoon in that hospital room, actually laughing, head back, out loud, and she could not remember the last time she had done that. Where'd the money come from? "Baby?" Margaret asked one evening, her eyes sharp again in the way Emily had missed so badly. Numbers like these don't fall out of the sky, and Emily told her the truth because she had built her whole life on telling the truth, even when it cost her. "A man," she said. "A bad man trying to be good." Margaret was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "There's no such thing as a bad man trying to be good, Emily. There's just a man, and what he does next." Her eyes drifted closed. "You watch what he does next." And what he did next, he did in the open. Alessandro Romano began pulling his money out of the businesses that hurt people. He turned down the old contracts. He told his partners, in rooms full of careful faces, that he was changing direction. And one gold afternoon in the corner booth, he told Emily why. Turning his cup slowly on the table the way he always did. "I've tasted what it feels like to be a man instead of a monster," he said. "And I can't unknow it, not anymore." Emily carried those words home like something warm in her pocket. But there was another man carrying words home that month, and his were cold. Victor Russo was 45 years old. He had been the right hand for 12 years, the one who kept the empire running while the boss drank coffee with a waitress. He was the man who had stood beside Alessandro at the old boss's funeral, holding an umbrella over the younger man's head in the rain. He was the man who believed, truly, honestly believed that he had earned more than a lifetime as somebody's shadow. But understand this, because it matters. Victor did not turn because he wanted the throne. He turned because of a rule his world had carved into him before he was old enough to shave. A soft boss is a dead boss, and a dead boss drags everyone standing near him down into the grave. The other families could smell the change on Alessandro like blood in the water, the withdrawn money, the refused contracts, the afternoons unaccounted for. Victor wasn't betraying his king out of greed. He was drowning, and he believed, in the flat, arithmetic way of frightened men, that this was the only thing that would keep his head above the water. Here is what Emily didn't know, what even Alessandro didn't know. Months ago, before the broken cup, before any of it, Victor had already taken a meeting. In a warehouse with no windows, across a table from Luciano Moretti, boss of the rival family, blood enemy of the Romano name for 2 generations. The terms were simple, the way terrible things always are. Victor would open the doors from the inside, provide the schedules, neutralize the loyal guards. Luciano would do the rest. And afterward, the territory would be split, the south half of the city to Victor, a crown of his own at last. Emily knew none of this. She only knew her mother was going to live. She held on to that. She did not know that the kindness she had pulled out of that man, the very humanity she had handed back to him, had painted a target on his back in the eyes of his own kingdom. And she did not know that in just a few days, her own 2 feet would carry her to the exact door where all of these secrets were waiting. The call came on a Tuesday morning, and for once, it was good news. Full recovery, the doctor said. He actually used those words. Full recovery words Emily had stopped letting herself imagine somewhere around the 14th month of insurance calls. Her mother was out of danger. The numbers were moving in the right direction and staying there. Emily stood in the diner's back hallway with the phone pressed to her ear and her other hand over her mouth, and she cried for the 3rd time in a month, but this time, for the first time in 2 years, they were not tears of grief. And so she decided to do something she had never done before. She would go to that gray stone building a 2nd time. The first time, she had gone there to refuse. This time, she would go to say thank you, 2 words she suspected Alessandro Romano had heard even less often in his life than the word no. She brought a box of cookies. Her mother had insisted, had practically ordered it from her hospital bed, jabbing a finger that was finally strong enough to jab. "You tell him," Margaret said, "that the woman he saved wants him to eat something home-baked, once in his life. Everybody deserves that once." Emily tied the box with a ribbon and drove across town, smiling most of the way. She should have noticed sooner that something was wrong. The building was too quiet. The secretary's desk on the ground floor stood empty, a coffee going cold beside a silent phone. The man who led her upstairs, a face she didn't recognize, told her Mr. Romano was in a meeting on the top floor and asked her to wait in a small lounge on the 3rd. Then he disappeared, and the silence folded in behind him. The hallway light was yellowed and old, the kind of light that belongs to places that don't want to be looked at too closely. Emily waited 5 minutes. 10. Then she stepped out to find a bathroom, took a wrong turn down a carpeted corridor and stopped. Voices, coming from behind a wooden door standing slightly ajar, halfway down the hall. A side office, dim inside. The first voice she knew instantly. Low, even, unhurried, the voice that had spent 12 years speaking from just behind Alessandro's shoulder. Victor Russo. The second voice came through a speakerphone. Hoarse, leisurely. The voice of a man who had never once in his life needed to hurry. "The signing ceremony. Friday of next week," Victor was saying. "He'll only bring Matteo and the kid, Enzo. I handle the rest. Their weapons stay at the door, my arrangement, my men on security. And Romano himself? the hoarse voice asked. Done at the table, clean and fast, before the ink dries. A pause. The creak of a chair. The list of loyalists that need sweeping up afterward. I already sent it to you. 12 names. None of them will see it coming. You've thought of everything, Victor. I've had 12 years to think. And then Victor's voice dropped lower, and something in it went hard as a fist. And remember my end of it, Luciano. The south half. Exactly as promised. Luciano. Luciano Moretti. Emily's blood turned to ice water in her veins. 2 years of sitting beside a hospital bed had taught her 2 things. How to read the words people don't say out loud, and never, ever to be more than a hand's reach from her phone. Her fingers were shaking so badly she nearly dropped it. She pulled it out, pressed record, and eased it toward the gap in the door. 40 seconds. 50. Every sentence landing like a hammer blow the ceremony, the table, the list of 12 names. The south half of the city. She had enough. She had more than enough. She took 1 step backward to leave, and the floorboard under her foot creaked. The conversation inside stopped dead. 1 second of silence. 2. Then the slow groan of a chair turning on a wooden floor, and Victor's voice much, much closer than before. Who's out there? The door opened. Victor Russo's eyes met Emily's across the yellowed hallway. And in a thousandth of a second, both of them understood exactly what the other one knew. Emily ran. The hallway, the corner, the stairwell door. She hit it with both hands and half fell through it. Behind her, footsteps. Not hurried. And that was worse. Far worse. Those were the footsteps of a man who knows the prey has no way out. Down the stairs, 2 at a time, her heart slamming against her ribs. The cookie box was gone, dropped somewhere. She didn't remember dropping it, and her phone was in her hand, and her hands were shaking so badly she typed the passcode wrong twice. Come on, come on. 3rd try. The screen opened. Messages. His number, Alessandro's, saved weeks ago from the treatment paperwork, saved and never used, because using it would have meant admitting something she wasn't ready to admit. She attached the recording. Her thumb stumbled across the keyboard. Victor is betraying you. Luciano. Friday. A door banged open at the top of the stairwell, 2 floors up. She hit send. Then she was through the ground floor exit and out into the back parking lot, the late afternoon light slanting long and gold across the asphalt. Her car sat in the far corner. 30 meters. She ran. 20 meters. 15. A black SUV slid out from between the parked cars and stopped directly across her path. Emily froze mid-stride. The door opened. Victor Russo stepped down, unhurried, and took a moment to straighten his cuffs, first the left, then the right, the way a man does before sitting down to dinner. And the smile on his face had the shape of a smile, but everything human inside of it had been scooped out. How much did you hear? He asked. Emily took 1 step back, but her chin stayed up because her mother had raised her to stand up straight. Even now, especially now. Enough, she said. Victor sighed. It was almost regretful, almost gentle, and that was the most terrifying thing she had ever heard. You know, he said. I told him from the beginning that you were a problem, a crack in the wall. He didn't listen. He slid his hands into his pockets. Now you're my problem. He nodded once. 2 men came around the SUV. Emily fought, she clawed, she kicked, she drove her heel into a shin and heard a man curse, but she did not beg, and she did not cry, and she did not plead. Not one word, not one sound they could take home as a trophy. A rough canvas bag came down over her head, and the gold afternoon light vanished, and the last thing she felt was the pavement tilting away beneath her feet as they lifted her. Then the SUV's door slammed, and the world went dark and moving. What Emily couldn't see was this. Her phone lay on the asphalt where it had been knocked from her hand screen, cracked, still glowing in the long light, and on that cracked screen, beneath her half-finished message, a single word in small gray letters. Delivered. Victor walked over. He bent down, picked up the phone, and turned it over in his hand. He read the word, and for the first time that entire afternoon, the smile disappeared from his face. The meeting on the top floor ended a little after 5. Alessandro came down to the lobby, and a man at the desk mentioned it almost in passing. A girl had come by, asked for him, carried a box of something. Cookies, maybe, but it seemed she'd already gone. The box sat on the waiting room chair, the ribbon still tied, untouched. Something cold moved down Alessandro's spine. 15 years of survival had built an instinct into him, the way weather builds a coastline, slow, permanent, and never wrong. A woman does not drive across the city with a box of home-baked cookies and then leave without handing them to anyone. He took out his phone. One message, from a saved number. Emily. Half a line of broken text. Victor is betraying you. Luciano. Friday, and an audio file. He stood in the middle of his office, the city going dark in the windows behind him, and pressed play. Victor's voice filled the room. The signing ceremony? Friday of next week. He'll only bring Matteo and the kid. Enzo. Done at the table, clean and fast, before the ink dries. The list of loyalists that need sweeping up afterward, I already sent it. And remember my end of it, Luciano. The south half. Exactly as promised. The recording ended. The room was silent. 12 years. The man who had stood beside him at his adoptive father's funeral, holding the umbrella. The man he had handed the keys of the kingdom. One by one, year after year. Every sentence in that recording was a knife going in, but the deepest cut was not the betrayal. Men like him were raised to expect betrayal the way sailors expect storms. The deepest cut was the message, broken off at half a line, because he knew exactly why it had broken off. And standing there in the dark office, Alessandro Romano finally understood the price. In his world, there was only one thing worse than becoming weak, becoming honest. He had done both, and the bill had come due, but it hadn't been sent to him. It had been sent to her. He called Victor. It rang, and no one answered. He called again, the line was dead. And so the last doubt died with it. Within the hour, they came the ones he called. Not many. It didn't need to be many. Matteo, 63 years old, the driver, the man who had carried a 12-year-old Alessandro to the car the night his father was shot, and the only soul left in the organization who still called him kid. Enzo, 27. The young bodyguard Alessandro had once pulled out from under a false conviction, loyal in the way that only the rescued understand. And 4 others, old hands, quiet men, because here was the bitter arithmetic of it. The list of 12 names Victor had marked for death, the loyalists to be swept up, turned out to be the exact list of every man Alessandro could still trust. His enemy had done his sorting for him. Enzo's technician bent over a laptop for 20 minutes and then looked up. The last signal from Emily's phone, before it went dark, had come from one place, the abandoned docks, east side, old Moretti ground where 2 generations of Romanos and Morettis had already spilled blood into the harbor water, and where, it seemed, blood was going to be spilled one last time. Matteo checked the slide of a pistol that was older than Enzo and looked up at the man he still thought of as a boy. "What's the plan, kid?" Alessandro stood at the window, watching the city light itself up, one cold string of lamps at a time. "Their plan is Friday," he said, "which means tonight. They're not ready." He turned around. "We go tonight." She came to slowly, the way you surface from deep water. The first thing was the smell, sea salt, rust, and old machine oil, then the ache in her shoulders. Her wrists were bound behind her to a metal chair, the rope biting when she tested it. High overhead, a single industrial lamp burned in the darkness of a vast warehouse ceiling, and through a broken window across the room, she could see them. Dead cranes, standing black and motionless against the night sky, like the skeletons of giants no one had bothered to bury. The docks, the abandoned docks on the east side. Footsteps approached across the concrete, unhurried, measured, expensive shoes on a filthy floor. The man who stepped into the circle of light was past 50, in a suit of silver gray, with silver at his temples and hands folded loosely in front of him. He was elegant the way a polished blade is elegant, and Emily realized, with a chill that went all the way down to her bones, that she was looking at the thing Alessandro could have become if there had been no broken cup, no roadside diner, no one on this earth who had ever dared to tell him the truth. "Luciano Moretti," she said. Her voice came out steadier than she had any right to expect. "So he's mentioned me. I'm flattered." Luciano pulled up a second metal chair, turned it, and sat down facing her, genuinely curious, the way a collector examines a strange find. "So you're the one who broke Alessandro Romano. I must admit, I had imagined something else, something more." He tilted his head. "What did you do to him? Witchcraft? Or did he simply grow old before his time?" Emily was tied to a chair in an abandoned warehouse, exhausted, aching, and more frightened than she had ever been in her life. She lifted her chin anyway. "I didn't break him," she said. "I fixed him. He was already broken when he walked into my diner. Everyone around him was just too afraid to tell him." She looked straight into Luciano Moretti's eyes, the same way she had looked into another man's eyes across a counter, a lifetime ago. "You're broken the exact same way. The only difference is, nobody's ever had the courage to say it to you." For a moment, the warehouse was absolutely still. Then Luciano laughed, a real laugh, hoarse and surprised, and then the laugh died in his throat. All at once, like a light switched off. "Now I understand why he keeps you," he said quietly. From the shadows beyond the lamplight, Victor Russo stepped forward. He hadn't spoken until now, and when he did, his voice was flat and urgent. "End it. She's the only loose thread. Erase her, and the Friday plan stays intact." We proceed as Luciano raised one hand without looking at him. "You still don't understand people, Victor. That is why you will always be the right hand and never the head." He rose from the chair, buttoned his jacket, and smiled down at Emily. "The recording is already sent. Friday is already dead." But, and his smile widened, slow and terrible, a boss who has learned to love is a boss who has learned to fear. He will come, tonight, with whatever handful of loyal men he has left, and I will finish the Romano line on the very ground where my father swore he would do it. He turned to his men in the dark. "Keep her alive. She's the bell that rings him here." And Emily understood, with a horror colder than anything the night had shown her yet, that she was not a prisoner. She was bait. The trap had never been set for her. It had been set for the man she had taught how to be human, and the fear came crashing in. But for the first time in 2 years, it was not fear for her mother, and it was not fear for herself. It was fear for him. Alessandro stood alone in his office and opened the safe. Inside, on a folded cloth, lay a single handgun, the last possession of the old man he used to be. He had locked it in there 3 years ago, along with a vow that he would never touch it again, that whatever else he was, whatever else he had done, that particular hand would stay closed forever. He stood looking at it for a long time. The city hummed far below the windows. The clock on the wall counted. Then he picked it up, and his hand did not shake. That was the thing that frightened him most of all. From the doorway, a voice. "You planning to save the girl, kid? Or planning to die with her?" Matteo leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, watching him load the weapon with the flat, unreadable eyes of a man who had watched 2 generations of Romanos load weapons before him. Alessandro slid the last round home. "I'm planning to do one last decent thing with these dirty hands," he said. "If I live through it, I'll spend the rest of my life doing decent things with clean ones. And if I don't," he buttoned his coat, "1 button, 2, then at least I die as a man, not as a monster. She gave me that. Tonight, I pay the debt." Matteo was silent for a moment. Then he nodded, slow. "Your father wouldn't have understood a single word of that sentence," he said. "I'm glad you're not like him." They gathered around the hood of a car in the underground garage, 7 men and 1 hand-drawn map, and Matteo laid out the ground the way only he could, because Matteo had known those docks for 40 years, since the old days of unloading contraband for the old boss, back when the cranes still moved and the Moretti name still had a fleet. Luciano would be waiting for an army at the main gate, so they would bring no army, and they would not use the main gate. "There's a tidal creek behind the yard," Matteo said, tracing it with 1 thick finger. "Runs in from the east, past the breakwater. Old wooden pier at the end of it, rotten, but it'll hold. Comes up directly behind the warehouse row. The Morettis never watched their own back door 40 years ago. Men like that don't change. 7 men, 2 small boats, no lights, and Enzo would take 2 others overland to the west gate, where at exactly 2 in the morning they would make some noise. Across the city, in the warehouse, Emily was not waiting to be rescued. The guard in the far corner had been nodding off for an hour, chin dipping toward his chest, jerking awake, dipping again, and Emily had found something. The edge of a rusted sheet metal panel, jutting out half an inch from the base of the column behind her chair. Sharp, low, exactly at the height of her bound wrists. 2 years of nursing, a dying woman teaches you a patience that no school on earth can teach. She began to saw the rope against the metal edge, a millimeter at a time. Freeze when the guard stirs, move when he settles. Her shoulders screamed, her wrists went slick and warm. She kept her eyes on the sleeping man, and her breathing slow, and every tiny rasp of rope against rust was a gamble with her life on the table. She did not stop. And so, under a moonless sky, 2 unlit boats slid out across the black water toward the abandoned docks on the east side, the ground where 2 generations of Romanos and Morettis had already bled for the sake of hatred, and where, tonight, blood would be spilled one final time, over a woman whose only weapon in this world was the truth. The cup that had shattered against a diner wall all those weeks ago had rolled a long, long way all the way down to the waterline, and before sunrise, it would collect its full price. Water lapped against the hulls, soft as breathing. The 2 boats slid in along the tidal creek with their engines cut, poled the last stretch by hand through water black as oil. Somewhere out across the yard, a radio crackled and went quiet. A patrol light swept its slow arc over the rusted container stacks, passed on, swept back. The old wooden pier rose out of the dark exactly where Mateo had said it would rotten, barnacled, 40 years forgotten, and it creaked under every boot like it wanted to give them away. 7 shadows moved up the pilings and into the shadow of the warehouse row. And there they crouched, and there they waited, and Alessandro watched the second hand of his watch crawl toward 2 o'clock. At exactly 2, the west end of the docks bloomed orange. The boom rolled across the yard a half-second later. Enzo's diversion, an old car with a full tank going up against the west gate fence. Radios shrieked to life in every direction at once. Boots hammered concrete, shouted orders overlapped, and half the guards in the yard went running toward the fire. Mateo watched them go and shook his head slowly in the dark. Same as 40 years ago, he muttered. The Morettis never did learn to watch their own back. They moved, fast and low along the warehouse wall. 2 perimeter guards never saw them coming. Mateo took the first, Alessandro the second, quick and quiet. 2 men lowered to the ground and left sleeping in the shadows. No shots. Not yet. Inside the warehouse, the rope gave way. Emily's arms came free, and the blood rushed back into her hands like fire. Across the room, her guard had jolted upright at the distant boom, hesitated and then bolted for the door to look, his chair clattering behind him. Emily slipped from her own chair and pressed herself behind a row of steel drums, her heart slamming so hard she was genuinely afraid he would hear it, her raw wrists screaming, her legs half numb beneath her. The side door of the warehouse eased open. A shadow slid through. Emily held her breath. Her hand closed around a length of iron bar on the floor. 2 years of nursing had taught her patience, but the last 6 hours had taught her something else, and she was done being anyone's bait. The patrol light swept past the broken window and threw one moving stripe of white across the intruder's face. Alessandro. The iron bar slipped from her fingers. He crossed the darkness between them in 5 steps, and then the 2 of them were standing face to face in the middle of that ruined warehouse. 1 second, 2, and neither of them touched the other, the way he had never touched her. The old, respectful distance, holding even here, even now. You actually came, she whispered, and her voice cracked on the last word. You taught me the difference between a hand and a chain, he said, and he held his hand out to her, palm open. This is my hand. Take it. We're going home. She took it. The second time, in all their story, that they had ever touched. They moved for the side door, Mateo covering the angle, 2 men ahead of them into the night, and they were 3 steps out onto the open concrete when every floodlight in the shipping yard came on at once. White, blinding. Night turned into noon in a single switch throw. Emily's arm came up against the glare, and when her eyes adjusted, she saw them. On the mezzanine of stacked containers ahead, dozens of gun barrels glittering in the light, ringing the yard on 3 sides. And at the center of them, arms folded, stood Luciano Moretti, patient as a spider, smiling like a man whose dinner has just been served. Alessandro Romano, he called down, his voice carrying easily across the concrete. My father waited 30 years to see a Romano kneel on these docks. He didn't live long enough. The smile widened. But I did. Alessandro's diversion had worked perfectly, because it had been part of Luciano's trap all along. Mateo moved first. The old man didn't freeze, didn't flinch, didn't wait for the world to decide. He threw his whole weight against a rack of steel drums and sent them crashing down into a wall of cover, and his voice tore across the concrete. Run! The first volley ripped the white night apart. Then everything was noise. Bullets hammered the container walls like hail on a tin roof. Muzzle flashes stuttered along the mezzanine. The smell of gunpowder rolled in over the smell of sea salt, and the floodlights turned every running shadow into a target. Emily had thought she knew what fear was. She had sat through 2 years of hospital nights. She had been shouted at by a king. She had been taken off a parking lot in broad daylight with a bag over her head. She had been wrong. Fear was the sound of metal shrieking 3 inches from your ear. Fear was running so hard you no longer knew whether your feet were touching the ground or the air. Fear was the space between 2 containers, 4 steps of open, lit concrete, and knowing you had to cross it anyway. She crossed it, and halfway across, a shape slammed into her from the side, not a bullet. A man, Enzo, arriving out of the smoke with the diversion team, throwing himself between her and the mezzanine guns. She heard the impact take him. A short, terrible sound, like a fist on a door. His shoulder bloomed dark, and even then, even falling, his last act was to shove her the final step into cover behind the container wall before his legs gave out. Stay down, he managed. Emily was already moving. She dragged him the rest of the way in by his collar, tore the sleeve off her own shirt at the seam, and bound his shoulder tight, hard pressure. high knot, her whole body shaking and her hands perfectly certain, because 2 years of nursing teaches your hands to know their work even when the rest of you is coming apart. You don't get to die, she told him through her teeth. I've done my quota of watching people almost die. Find another hobby. Enzo, gray-faced, actually laughed. Out in the yard, the old man was rewriting the night. Matteo moved between the containers as if 40 years had never passed a step. An angle, a single unhurried shot, then gone before the return fire found him. No spray, no panic. Every trigger pull was a sentence with a period at the end. One by one, the muzzle flashes along the mezzanine began going dark. "Kid!" His voice cracked across the yard. "Victor, 2 o'clock, the crane yard. Don't let him slip." And the battle turned not all at once, but in pieces, the way a wall comes down. Because Luciano's men were many, but they were hired men. They fought for money. Alessandro's 7 fought for something else. And in a gunfight at 2 in the morning, with the geometry against you and an old ghost picking you apart from the shadows, something else is worth more than numbers. The mercenaries began falling back from the mezzanine's edge, then from the stairs, then from each other. Through the smoke and the glare of the floodlights, Alessandro saw it. A single figure detaching itself from the collapsing line, moving fast and low toward the crane yard. Victor Russo. Not fleeing, Victor never fled. He was running toward the exit route that a traitor always prepares in advance, the door a man builds into every room the moment he decides to burn the house. Alessandro broke from cover and went after him. 12 years of brotherhood ending in a foot race between the corpses of dead cranes. The chase ended at the foot of the cranes. Victor's exit route ran along the fence line behind the crane yard, and Alessandro cut the angle, the way he had learned to cut angles from the very man he was chasing. When Victor came around the base of the great rusted tower, Alessandro was already there. Both guns came up at the same instant, and there they stood, 10 feet apart in the shadow of a dead machine. 2 barrels level, 2 fingers on 2 triggers, the gunfire of the main yard fading behind them into a distant, rolling backdrop, like a storm moving out to sea. Neither man fired. "Don't look at me like that," Victor said. His voice was low, and it shook not with fear. "With 12 years, don't you dare look at me with those betrayed eyes. I kept this kingdom running while you were busy learning to be a good man with some coffee-pouring waitress. Do you think our world allows good men? Do you?" His grip flexed on the gun. The other families smelled blood months ago. The withdrawn money, the refused contracts, the empty chair at the table. Luciano came to me, Alessandro, because the entire city could see you were dying, and you were the only one who couldn't. Honesty is a death sentence in this world. I only moved before your death sentence dragged me into the grave along with you. The words echoed off the crane's iron bones and died over the water, and Alessandro answered calm, perfectly calm. And somehow that was more frightening than any rage could have been. You're right about one thing, Victor. In our old world, honesty is a death sentence. He took a single step forward, gun never wavering. That's why I came tonight, to bury that world. Another step. I was going to give you a way out. Did you know that? Your name was first on the list of men I meant to hand the clean businesses to. The restaurants, the real estate, all of it, legitimate, yours. His voice dropped. You betrayed me 3 weeks before I was going to give you everything. And for one single second, the traitor's face cracked open, and underneath it was the 33-year-old kid who had held an umbrella over Alessandro's head at the old boss's funeral, standing in the rain because there was only one umbrella, and it had never once occurred to him to keep it for himself. 1 second, then it closed. Too late, Victor said softly, and he pulled the trigger first. Alessandro was faster. 1 shot, only one. Victor folded down against the base of the crane, his gun clattering away across the concrete, spinning once, going still. Alessandro crossed the distance and knelt beside him. No triumph in his face, no vindication, nothing but the bone-deep weariness of a man who has just buried 12 years of his own life with a single movement of one finger. Victor's breath came shallow. His eyes found Alessandro's, and something almost like a smile touched his mouth. "At least," he whispered, "that shot. You're still a Romano." Alessandro shook his head slowly, and his voice was cold, and it was sad, and it was final. "No, Victor. That was the last bullet the Romano name will ever fire. After tonight, the name dies with you." Victor Russo's eyes fixed on the dead crane above him, and stayed there. For a moment, the night was quiet. Then the radio clipped to the dead man's belt, crackled to life, a hoarse, leisurely voice, fraying now at its edges. "Victor? Report. Victor." Alessandro reached down and unclipped the radio. He rose to his feet, He pressed the key, and he spoke into it with the voice the entire city had feared for 15 years. Victor can't answer anymore. A pause, one heartbeat long. Your turn, Luciano. Far off at the waterline, beyond the containers, a lone figure broke from the shadows and began to run toward the old pier, and the black water, and the last boat out of a dying kingdom. The main yard was already finished. The mercenaries had heard the radio go silent, had done the arithmetic of hired men everywhere, and had laid down their guns or melted into the dark, because mercenaries do not die for losing kings. The floodlights burned on over an emptying battlefield, and the only man still running was the one who had built the trap. Luciano Moretti ran for the old wooden pier, where a lone boat sat moored at the far end, rocking gently on the black water. Alessandro caught him halfway down it. The rotten planks groaned and cracked under both men's weight. The black sea rolled beneath the gaps in the boards, and Luciano turned out of road, out of men, out of night but not, even now, out of schemes. He raised both hands slowly, and when he spoke, his voice had found its old leisure again, hoarse and smooth, the voice of a man who had talked his way off of ledges before. Wait. Think, Romano. He took a slow half-step forward. Kill me, and you swallow both empires whole. My territory, my roots, my people. They'll kneel to whoever's standing at sunrise. They always have. All of it. Yours, without spilling one more drop. You would be the greatest king this city has ever seen. A pause, a silken smile. Or we split it, down the middle. I'm a reasonable man. Choose. Sea wind, silence, the creak of old wood. And in that one moment, just one, Emily, standing at the head of the pier with Matteo's hand gripping her shoulder, held her breath. Because she knew this was it, not the bullet. This was the real battle of the whole long night. The old man and the new man, meeting for the last time inside the same body, and every empire in the world, stacked on one side of the scale. Alessandro Romano stood very still on the rotten planks. And then he answered, and his voice was quiet enough that the wind almost took it. That's the thing your kind will never understand, Luciano. A step forward. I didn't come here to take your kingdom. Another step. I came here to bury mine. Luciano's eyes flashed and his hand whipped toward the small of his back, toward the second gun that men like him always carry. Alessandro's shot rang out first. One sound, one echo, rolling out flat across the harbor. Luciano Moretti dropped where he stood, folded backward off the edge of the pier, and the black water beneath the boards swallowed the Moretti name whole. 2 generations of blood feud, 2 graveyards worth of hatred, ended in a single ring of sound and a widening circle on dark water. Then, slowly, the sky began to change. Gray first, then a thin cold pink, rising up behind the dead cranes. Enzo's men, Enzo himself, among them, arm-strapped and face gray, refusing to sit down, herded the surrendered stragglers into a line against the fence. The floodlights faded to nothing against the daylight. Alessandro stood alone at the end of the pier, the gun still in his hand. He looked at it for a long time, the last possession of the old man, the thing he had locked in a safe 3 years ago, and had sworn never to touch, and had touched anyway for her. Then he drew back his arm and threw it. The gun turned once, twice against the pink sky, and dropped into the black water without a splash worth hearing. The monster sank with it. The man stayed on the shore. Emily walked out along the pier to him, her sleeve torn where she'd bound Enzo's shoulder, her hair wild, her wrists ringed with rope burns, and stood beside him, and together they watched the sun come up over the dead cranes. Neither of them said anything. Nothing needed saying. 3 names died at the East Docks that night: Victor Russo, Luciano Moretti, and Alessandro Romano, the boss. Only 2 people walked off that pier at dawn: a woman who had never once bowed her head and a man who was finally allowed to lift his. In the months that followed, Alessandro Romano did something no boss in the history of that city had ever done. He dismantled the empire, piece by piece, door by door. He set free every man who wanted to leave. No debts, no threats, no strings. He signed the clean businesses over to the men who stayed, the restaurants, the real estate, the honest work, and to the last of them, gathered in a room that had once decided the fates of neighborhoods, he said this: I am not leaving you a kingdom. I am leaving you a way out. That is the greatest gift I have. Matteo retired to a small fishing boat and a quieter sea. Enzo, his shoulder carrying a scar he refused to complain about, took over the legitimate restaurant chain and turned out, to everyone's surprise, including his own, to be good at it. And then Alessandro disappeared for a while, to bury the old man, some said, and Emily did not know if he was ever coming back. Life, meanwhile, went on the way life insists on doing. Margaret recovered completely. She sat in her chair by the window, complained magnificently about daytime television, and demanded the hard crossword puzzles, the ones with no mercy in them. One evening she looked up at her daughter and asked, "That man, in the end, what did he do next?" Emily smiled. "He did the right thing, Mama. Then that's worth more than you know." Emily left the old diner with a long hug from Dana and a rough, wordless handshake from Rosa that said everything a soldier's daughter could say, and she opened a small coffee shop of her own, sunlit, warm, hers. On the main wall, she hung a single object, a broken cup, the cup from that night, its cracks sealed back together with seams of gold. The old way, the kintsugi way, the thing that had shattered, mended, and become more beautiful than it had ever been whole. She hired people who were struggling, because she remembered, and when a customer shouted at her youngest waitress one busy morning, Emily took the trembling girl aside afterward and told her, "Don't shrink. If you did right, you stand up straight. In this shop, nobody bows their head." Then, one golden afternoon, the dead hour, the shop empty, the light slanting through the windows exactly the way it had on a certain night, in a certain diner, a lifetime ago, the bell above the door rang. Emily turned around, and time stopped for the second time in her life. Alessandro stood in the doorway, a plain sweater, no convoy, no shadow at his shoulder. His face was older but lighter, like a man who had finally set down something he'd been carrying for 15 years. He walked to the counter and sat down on the stool across from where she stood, the old ritual. She didn't say a word. She brewed a cup of coffee and set it down in front of him. He looked up at the golden cup on the wall, then at her, and he smiled that rare, hard-won smile. "This time," he said, "I won't break a single cup." Emily laughed. "Good, because this time the cups are mine, and here, dear friends, is where this story leaves us. The most dangerous moment is never when someone shouts in your face. It's the moment right after, when you decide whether to make yourself small or to stand up straight and look them in the eye. A waitress stood up straight before a king and pulled the man out of the monster. A king stood up straight before his entire kingdom and walked out of it as a human being. The cup that shattered that night was never truly broken. It was only waiting to be mended with something far more precious than gold. And this time, no cup had to break for two people to find each other. Because in the end, this story teaches us something simple and true. Kindness is never weakness, honesty is never wasted, and no soul, no matter how far it has wandered, is ever beyond the reach of one person brave enough to tell the truth with love. What you give to the world with a straight back and an open heart will always, always find its way home to you. So tell me, my friends, how did this story make you feel? Have you ever met someone the world had given up on, who only needed one honest voice to find their way back? Have you ever had to stand up straight when every part of you wanted to shrink? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one, and I would truly love to hear what's in your heart tonight. And if this story touched you, please press that subscribe button, give this video a like, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. It helps our little channel more than you know, and it means new heartwarming stories for you every single day. Thank you for staying with me all the way to the end. I wish you good health, a joyful life, and peace in your heart, each and every day. Goodbye for now, my friends, and I'll see you in the next story.